Welcome to Crimson Legacy Historians, where the past is not just remembered, but brought back to life with depth and clarity. September 3, 1260. 20,000 Mongol warriors crossed the dusty plains of Palestine. Their composite bows gleamed in the morning sun. For 40 years, no army on earth had stopped them. They had crushed China. They had obliterated Persia. They had turned Baghdad into a smoking ruin. Now they rode toward a small spring called Ain Jalut. Cairo, they believed, would fall within weeks. Hidden in the hills above, Mamluk commander Baibars watched the approaching horde. He did not move. He did not signal. He simply watched. He knew something the Mongols did not know. Today, the world's most feared army was about to walk into a trap. To understand what happened at Ain Jalut, you must first understand what made these two military systems so lethal. The Mongol war machine was not merely an army. It was a system of conquest refined over decades. Every warrior could fire 20 arrows per minute from horseback, while maintaining formation at full gallop. Their decimal organization divided armies into units of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. Communication was so precise that a commander could coordinate maneuvers across 50 miles of battlefield using flags, horns, and mounted messengers. But this was not what made them unstoppable. What made them unstoppable was terror. When Mongol scouts appeared on the horizon, entire cities surrendered without a fight. The reason was simple. Everyone knew the stories. Resist the Mongols and they would slaughter every living thing within your walls. Submit immediately and you might survive as their subjects. This system had conquered everything from Korea to Hungary. In 1258, the Mongols demonstrated their power by destroying Baghdad, the jewel of the Islamic world. Hulagu's forces executed the caliph by rolling him in carpets and trampling him with horses. The city burned for weeks. Scholars put the death toll at hundreds of thousands. The message was clear. Nothing could stand against Mongol might. The Mamluks represented something entirely different. These were not conscripted peasants. They were not feudal knights fighting for land and honor. They were warrior slaves, purchased as children from the steppes and Caucasus Mountains, then subjected to the most intensive military training program in the medieval world. From age 7, a Mamluk recruit learned one thing: mounted combat, not farming, not crafts, not politics, just warfare. They practiced archery until they could split arrows at full gallop. They trained with swords until blade work became instinct. Most crucially, they mastered the art of coordinated cavalry charges that could shatter infantry formations like glass. Here is where it becomes interesting. Mongol strength came from adaptability and speed across vast distances. Mamluk power was concentrated specialization. A Mongol warrior was a superb generalist who could fight anywhere under any conditions. A Mamluk was a precision instrument designed for one specific purpose: destroying enemy cavalry in close combat. The strategic situation in 1260 could not have been more desperate for the Islamic world. Hulagu Khan controlled everything from Iran to Syria. His lieutenant Kitbuka commanded the advance force pushing toward Egypt with explicit orders: eliminate the Mamluk Sultanate, complete Mongol domination of the Middle East. Sultan Qutuz knew the mathematics were brutal. The Mongols had never lost a major battle. They commanded superior numbers, better logistics, and 40 years of psychological momentum. Every previous Islamic army had crumbled before their advance, but Qutuz possessed one advantage the Mongols had never faced: commanders who understood their tactical patterns. Baibars had studied Mongol methods during their conquest of Syria. He had observed their preference for drawing enemies into open terrain, where their mobility advantage became decisive. He had noted their confidence in pursuing retreating forces, a tactic that had delivered countless victories. Most importantly, he had identified the one scenario where Mongol advantages became vulnerabilities: broken terrain, where their formations could not maintain perfect coordination, where pursuit became channeled rather than fluid, where the unstoppable Mongol machine might finally meet its match. The stage was set for the most consequential battle of the 13th century. On one side, an empire that had never known defeat, commanded by generals who had conquered half the known world. On the other, elite slave warriors defending the last major Islamic power, led by a commander willing to stake everything on a single desperate gamble. What happened next would shatter the myth of Mongol invincibility forever. Dawn broke over the valley of Ain Jalut on September 3, 1260. Kitbuka's Mongol vanguard crested the hills overlooking the springs. Their horses snorted in the cool morning air. Below them, they spotted exactly what they expected. A Mamluk force positioned near the water source, perhaps 3,000 cavalry in loose formation. Kitbuka smiled. This would be over by midday. The Mongols descended into the valley with their standard battle formation. Heavy cavalry in the center, light archers on the flanks. Reserve units positioned to exploit any breakthrough. It was the same arrangement that had crushed armies from Beijing to Budapest. As the distance closed to bow range, something unexpected happened. The Mamluk commander raised his banner and wheeled his horse around. The entire Mamluk force began pulling back from the springs. Not in panic, but in what appeared to be organized retreat. Baibars had begun the performance of his life. Here is what made this moment psychologically brilliant. Mongol doctrine emphasized pursuit of retreating enemies. Every Mongol officer had been trained that fleeing forces were vulnerable forces. When your enemy runs, you chase them down and destroy them piecemeal before they can regroup. Kitbuka had personally witnessed this tactic succeed dozens of times. At the Battle of Mohi, fleeing Hungarian knights had been slaughtered by the thousands during their retreat. At Legnica, Polish cavalry had been annihilated while attempting to withdraw. The pattern was always the same. Retreat equals defeat. But Baibars understood something crucial about Mongol psychology. Their confidence in pursuit came from fighting enemies who retreated in genuine panic. Broken formations, scattered units, individual warriors fleeing for their lives. What Kitbuka was seeing looked different, but not different enough to trigger suspicion. The Mamluk retreat, moved at exactly the right speed, fast enough to suggest fear, slow enough to remain tempting. Baibars kept his formations intact but loose, creating the impression of an army trying to maintain discipline while falling back under pressure. The chase began. Mongol light cavalry surged forward. Their composite bows sent volleys of arrows toward the retreating Mamluks. Some arrows found their mark. Mamluk warriors tumbled from their saddles. The sight of enemy casualties confirmed what Kitbuka already believed. This was a real retreat, not a feint. Mile by mile, the Mongols pushed deeper into the valley. Their formation began to stretch as faster units pulled ahead and slower ones fell behind. The tight coordination that made Mongol armies so devastating started to loosen as the pursuit gained momentum. Baibars maintained the illusion perfectly. His rear guard fought just hard enough to seem desperate, just poorly enough to encourage continued pursuit. When Mongol pressure intensified, he ordered small groups to break away from the main force, simulating the kind of unit breakdown that preceded total collapse. 3 miles into the valley, Kitbuka made the fatal decision. Seeing what appeared to be a disintegrating enemy force, he committed his reserves to the pursuit. The entire Mongol army was now strung out across the valley floor, their attention focused entirely on the retreating Mamluks ahead. That is when Baibars triggered the trap. Hidden in the hills on both sides of the valley, 2 massive Mamluk formations had been waiting in absolute silence. Sultan Qutuz commanded the eastern force, nearly 5,000 heavy cavalry. Baibars' lieutenant controlled the western group, another 4,000 mounted warriors. At the predetermined signal, both forces erupted from concealment simultaneously. The psychological impact was devastating. One moment the Mongols were pursuing a beaten enemy through an empty valley. The next, they found themselves surrounded by fresh cavalry charging from 3 directions at once. Mongol battlefield communications, so effective in open terrain, collapsed in the chaos. Unit commanders could not see their superiors through the dust and confusion. Horn signals were drowned out by the thunder of hooves and clash of weapons. The decimal system that had coordinated armies across continents became useless in the span of minutes. But here is where Mamluk training superiority became decisive. While Mongol warriors excelled at mobile archery and coordinated maneuvers, Mamluks had spent their entire lives preparing for exactly this scenario. Close quarters mounted combat, where individual skill determined survival. In the brutal melee that followed, Mamluk warriors systematically dismantled their opponents. Their heavier armor absorbed Mongol arrow strikes. Their superior swordsmanship carved through Mongol formations. Most crucially, their horses were trained specifically for the chaos of cavalry combat. While Mongol mounts were bred for speed and endurance across open ground, Kitbuka realized too late that he had been outmaneuvered. The veteran commander tried desperately to rally his scattered forces, but the tactical situation had become hopeless. Surrounded, outnumbered in the immediate combat zone, caught completely off guard, the Mongol army began to disintegrate. When Kitbuka fell with a Mamluk lance through his chest, Mongol resistance collapsed entirely. The survivors who escaped that valley carried more than news of defeat back to Damascus. They carried the death of an idea that had dominated the medieval world for 4 decades. For the first time since Genghis Khan united the Mongol tribes, a major Mongol army had been completely destroyed in open battle, not defeated through siege warfare, not through guerrilla tactics, but annihilated in the kind of direct confrontation where Mongol superiority was supposed to be absolute. The strategic implications rippled across 3 continents within months. In Europe, where kings had been preparing for inevitable Mongol invasion, the news sparked celebrations from Paris to Vienna. The unstoppable force had finally been stopped. In the Islamic world, Ain Jalut triggered a renaissance of resistance. Syrian cities that had submitted to Mongol rule began expelling their occupiers. From Aleppo to Homs, local commanders who had accepted Hulagu's authority suddenly found the courage to rebel. But the psychological impact went deeper than politics. The Mongol Empire had built its expansion on a simple premise. Resistance was futile because Mongol victory was inevitable. That premise died in the dust of Ain Jalut. Hulagu Khan, receiving word of the disaster from his capital in Iran, faced an impossible choice. He could commit his remaining forces to avenging Kitbuka's defeat, but that would leave his eastern territories vulnerable to Chinese rebellion. Or he could consolidate his existing conquests and accept that Mongol expansion had reached its limit. He chose consolidation. The Mongol war machine that had rolled from the Pacific Ocean the Mediterranean Sea ground to a permanent halt at the borders of Egypt. Here is what made Ain Jalut different from other Mongol setbacks. The Mongols had suffered defeats before, but always in circumstances that could be explained away. Bad weather at the invasion of Japan, overextended supply lines in Eastern Europe, political instability following a great Khan's death. Ain Jalut offered no such excuses. Perfect weather, adequate supplies, unified command structure, veteran troops led by an experienced general. The Mamluks had simply outfought them, using superior tactics and training. The battle proved that Mongol military dominance was not based on supernatural invincibility, but on specific tactical advantages that could be countered by the right opponent under the right circumstances. Baibars had identified those circumstances and exploited them with devastating precision. Within a generation, the unified Mongol Empire had fractured into competing Khanates: the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Yuan dynasty, the Chagatai Khanate. All claimed legitimacy, but none possessed the overwhelming military superiority that had made Mongol conquest seem inevitable. The age of Mongol expansion was over. The age of Mongol decline had begun, and it all started in a valley called Ain Jalut, where one brilliant commander proved that even the world's most feared army could be destroyed by the right trap at the right moment. September 3, 1260, marked the day tactical genius triumphed over military reputation. Baibars had accomplished what no general before him had managed, turning Mongol strengths into fatal weaknesses through perfect deception and flawless execution. 20,000 warriors entered that valley believing they were invincible. Fewer than half escaped. The survivors carried back a message that would echo through history. No empire lasts forever. No army is unbeatable. And no reputation, however fearsome, can survive a commander who understands that reputation is not the same as reality. Baibars understood, and that understanding changed the world.